Hello, welcome to the Royal Canadian Regiment Museum. I'm Gordon Pinsent, and I'm proud to be the honorary chair of the Building for the Future campaign for the Royal Canadian Regiment Museum. In that role, I fully support the decision to raise funds to make much-needed improvements to the museum in order to ensure its long-term future as a valuable educational resource. The regiment's positive guidance for decades of the youth of our country's history has remained unbroken and proven to be a most important foundation at the start of countless successful careers, my own included. The Royal Canadian Regiment has served Canada proudly since 1883 and has been part of every major engagement from the South African War and the two World Wars through Korea and UN peacekeeping missions to the current operations in Afghanistan. The RCR Museum follows the history of the regiment, which is also the history of Canada, from its birth to the present day, both presenting and preserving that noble heritage. Now let's have a tour of this fine museum. The museum is housed in Wolseley Barracks, a National Heritage Site in London, Ontario, and the first Canadian structure to be built for military purposes. The current entrance was constructed in 1983 and leads into the Colonel Tom and Migsy Lawson foyer. At either end of the foyer are stained glass windows, one dedicated to Colonel Tom Lawson and the other dedicated to Brigadier General Ted Snow, that recognize their contributions to the regiment. As we proceed up the stairs and through the foyer, I would point out that the museum serves as an educational resource for area students and is visited by many school groups each year. We are now in a centennial gallery that houses recognition of former colonels of the regiment. The west wall of the centennial gallery is dominated by a reproduction of a painting, Dawn of Majuba Day, by British war artist Canton Woodville, depicting the Royal Canadian Regiment's victory at the Modor River near Paardeberg in 1900. The battle raged for 10 days and is now considered to be the turning point of the Boer War. A narrow corridor houses the regimental memorials that commemorate the major campaigns that the regiment has been involved with during its entire history, from the Northwest Rebellion to present-day operations. We have now entered the Colonel Douglas Black Weldon Library, which commemorates the Weldon family's support of the regiment. On one wall are the portraits of the monarchs under whom the Royal Canadian Regiment has served over its history. Also housed here are a number of paintings and include a lovely painting of a family being shown the Victoria Cross of a recent VC recipient and the Infanteer, a painting done to celebrate the regiment's 100th anniversary that was presented to the regiment by the current Colonel-in-Chief of the regiment, His Royal Highness, the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. Our next stop is the Regimental Quiet Room, which is a chapel housing the regimental colors and featuring stained glass windows from the regiment's churches on their base in Germany. A book of remembrance contains the names of all royals lost in battle. Through the window in the quiet room we see a Flanders cross that was used in France during the Great War to mark the temporary burial sites of soldiers. As we move to the second floor, where the various galleries trace our history, the first thing we see is a display of regimental battle honors. Battle honors are rooted in British tradition going back to the 16th century. The first one awarded in Canada is the Northwest Rebellion of 1885 and is held by the Royal Canadian Regiment. By 1883, the government realized the need to provide professional training for these soldiers, and the Infantry School Corps was formed, and Wolseley Hall was built in 1886. This is the genesis of the Royal Canadian Regiment, and from that point forward, the regiment became the oldest regular force infantry unit in all of Canada. On March 30th, 1885, the newly formed Royal Canadian Regiment was sent to Winnipeg, ready for action in the Northwest Rebellion. The RCR was involved in the Yukon Field Force from 1898 to 1900 to establish law and order before opening up the Yukon for the gold rush. In 1899, when hostilities broke out between Great Britain and settlers of South Africa, the Boers, a call for troops went out to the rest of the empire. Canada responded by deploying 1,000 troops, including the Royal Canadian Regiment, for the Boer War. Following a 22-hour forced march, the RCR went directly into a battle that lasted for 10 days and ultimately resulted in the surrender of the Boers to the Canadians. To recognize exceptional and commendable bravery during the Boer War, Her Majesty Queen Victoria personally knitted scarves for presentation to soldiers from the Commonwealth. RCR Private Townsend was the only Canadian presented with one of the Queen's scarves. Soldiers of the RCR were well trained and ready to respond to the call when Great Britain entered the Great War on August 4, 1914. This gallery recognizes the key role of the infantry and presents the specialized equipment used in the field, items as diverse as weapons and communications equipment. Housed in the Charles H. Ivey Medal Room are all of the medals, decorations, and honors that have been donated to the museum over the years. Of particular note are the orders, decorations, and medals of Brigadier General Milton Gregg, including the citation for his Victoria Cross, the highest award possible for a British Commonwealth soldier. On the 10th of September 1939, the Canadian government declared war on Germany. On July 10, 1943, the regiment arrived at Piceno in southern Italy, thus beginning the Sicilian and Italian campaigns of the Second World War. By December 1943, the regiment was engaged in a particularly vicious battle at Ortona that lasted for over a month before they were victorious. Next, we see a depiction of a command post bunker in Korea in one of the defensive positions occupied by the regiment during the Korean War. The scene shows a signaler on the radio and two officers discussing operations. You will note that it is very much like the trenches of the First World War. It was a war of bunkers, of entrenchments, patrols, artillery bombardment, and short, sharp, bloody actions. For decades following the Second World War, there was a standoff between the democratic Western nations and the communist Iron Curtain countries. This period became known as the Cold War. During the Cold War, it became clear that the Canadian North could be a possible battleground, and so Canadian soldiers were trained to survive in the high Arctic and to defend it from possible attack. At this time, Canada maintained fully staffed bases overseas, and RCR members frequently did European tours of duty. With the collapse of the Berlin Wall and the subsequent collapse of the Soviet Union, the Cold War ended. By the 1960s, the RCR troops became involved with UN peacekeeping duties. In 1964, the United Nations started sending troops to Cyprus, which proved to be a long-term commitment of almost 30 years. The RCR went on to serve on many missions in the Persian Gulf, Somalia, Bosnia, Croatia, and Kosovo. Currently, members of the Royal Canadian Regiment compose the largest portion of Canadian troops serving in Afghanistan. The Royal Canadian Regiment Museum is about preserving the regiment's history, which is the history of Canada, and the deeds and sacrifices of the regiment, to ensure that we remember those who sacrificed so much to protect Canada and provide us with the liberty and democratic way of life that we enjoy today. We plan to convert the current carriage archway into a new main entrance to the museum facing onto a city street. There will be a corresponding entrance facing the parade square. Our Building for the Future campaign will take over and occupy the entire west wing of historic Wolseley Hall and locate the entrance to the museum in the middle of the building. I hope that you enjoyed touring this fine military museum as much as I've enjoyed showing it to you. I invite you to come to London, Ontario to see the RCR Museum in person. Also, I hope you'll join me in supporting the Royal Canadian Regiment Museum. Every gift helps to ensure the future of this fine museum, to preserve its role as a guardian of regional and national history, and to provide more educational resources for students and scholars alike.